with your training itself. What's that looking like now? So you mentioned
And it's making me consider going back to the upper lower because that worked so well for me previously. Because I think there is a point of which you
when
just
you
get
look at someone like you or Gary Amlinger or Dirk, and you think to yourself, oh, that's too fatiguing. For you, maybe, but for you guys, and also consider this, those tuning in, you guys are professional bodybuilders who are trying to be the best, like literally. So as far as the training, how did it look leading up to? I love to do this. The listeners appreciate this too. How did it look leading up to WNBF Worlds? And then what's it going to transition to now that you had the results, you're looking to improve certain areas. Let's
yeah.
segue into that.
Yeah, so when I started like off season and then starting prep, I continued the same split because my volume kind of demanded it. And I'd been running for the majority of my off season an upper lower, upper lower, upper lower split. So 3 times a week
Okay.
frequency on the big muscle groups. For things like delts, they were at 4 times a week. They're a specific weakness of mine and something I really need to bring up and still need to bring up. But as I got deeper into prep, the idea of doing legs 3 times a week was just too haunting. And also my volume demands were less, i.e., my recoverability was just down. So my average volumes came down. So I moved to a legs push pull split towards the last kind of couple of months of prep. And I've continued that since. I've same split, but the emphasis now in terms of like the way I was dividing my volume, I was very much just evenly spread across muscle groups during prep to just maintain muscle. I wasn't thinking about specializing certain muscle groups because that inevitably means pulling back on others. And I just want to hold on to tissue, especially at the end. Whereas now, some areas I've identified to level the physique up in a sense. Quads as ever. I just don't have sweeping quads, so they just need to be as big as freaking possible. Then glutes, I've for the first time got a bit of isolation work. So I'm doing some hip thrusting twice a week. Not much, but I am doing it just to see if that helps the detail come through. When I talk about me and Cliff pushing for more condition, it was the rear glutes where like that's where it could come from. So I'm like, maybe if I just get more mass there, that condition will come through more easily. I have big glutes, but for whatever reason, the lines like a Dirk kind of lines or Brett
Mm.
Freeman, not quite there. So I don't know if I'll ever get that. Might be a genetic thing. I just have that stubborn fat that when I dig into it, I lose fullness from other areas. It's just not worth it. But doing a bit of isolated glute work, delts, so side delts are still a massive focus for me. But I'd done a lot of work on my back, specifically like lats and maybe lower lat development in my off season previously. I think my back's probably one of my strongest muscle groups now. But my chest looks strong in an off season, and when it's full, it's good. It gets lean very quickly. But the consequence of that is when I try and bring in other muscle groups, it starts shrinking because now there's no body
Mm.
fat on it and it just seems to lose size. So I'm like, if I can make my chest bigger, that also therefore isn't going to be as big a problem as I cut down. So chest I've never really made a priority. So that's going to be a priority for me this off season as well. It's been quite nice to go through that. And the training leading into Worlds is basically a deload. Cliff actually gave me like that's the one time he takes control of training is during the peak week. He just like follow this plan. I just follow it. But after that, and I think now I'm in my 12th week of this meso. So it's been 13 weeks because I had a week in New York after Worlds to just fuck around,
Oh,
basically.
nice.
That was a good
Yeah.
fun. Yeah, that was real fun. We still trained out there like super
Yeah.
hard in different gyms, but no program as such. But yeah, I haven't backed off and I've just been progressing ever since stepping off stage now.
So basically, you ran with like an upper lower 6 days a week. Do you have any aches and pains and injuries as someone who trains 6 days a week?
So sometimes,
Okay.
and I will navigate them. So the one I've had recently was actually it's gone now. Is in my wrist, my left wrist. So I just found that if I kept doing, and I had very low volume. I don't know actually know what set it off, but it got set off. It was basically painful when I do a supinated curl. So like a Bayesian curl, supinated, I couldn't do it. Like it was
Right.
just too much pain. So I just put it into neutral. It's still a little bit supinated, not fully neutral. And I prefer it supinated because I get a better stretch on the bicep. And I just move there and it's a pain free and I can do exactly what I need to do. It's fine. And now, probably a month later, it's back to normal. It's just fine. So I don't have any like my knees, my shoulders, like touch
Yeah.
wood, my elbows, all of that. Very rarely feel niggles. They're not a problem for me. I would say on the more resilient side versus fragile side of people like I've worked with people who couldn't deal with the amount of work that I'm putting through my body. And like you said, you just have to kind of auto-regulate it based off the individual in front of you. A good example actually of like two extremes of this within the evidence-based space who people immediately know of is like an Eric Helms. If
Right.
you see his stories, the amount of volume he's doing more than
Yeah.
me. He's close to 30 sets for multiple muscle groups, kind of wild amounts of volume. He's obviously keeping way up to date with the literature. He's training very hard, all of this. And then you have like Jeff Alberts on the same team, 3DMJ, evidence-based dude, much lower frequency, much lower volumes, obviously different parts of their bodybuilding career.
There it
Jeff is
is.
not pushing for the same amount of growth as what Eric
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
But Jeff has always had a lower volume than
That's true
Eric.
too. That's fair. Yeah, that's
Um,
actually facts. He actually started with the lowest vol. I don't think he ever tapped into this 40 set type stuff, 30 set type
oh no,
stuff. 6 days. Well, here's the thing. I keep saying frequency. Frequency is not the this is what he brought this up and it reminds me all the time. It's like, dude, you could do like two exercises every day and not be overtrained if you know how to manage the volume, the exercise selection, and not get injured either. So it's not frequency that's the issue. It's in relationship to the volume and the exercise
yeah,
selection and the intensity of effort, and then how that relates to your recovery outside of the gym in terms of are you taking care of your sleep and your nutrition? And you know all this, Steve, but for the listeners who are tuning in, I think that's important to mention because then they think, oh yeah, high frequency training gets you hurt in relationship to what else you're doing, maybe, yeah. And same thing with the
yeah.
high volume and same thing with the high intensity. It's like in relationship to how you've managed the other variables, yes, it can get you hurt for sure. Depends, right? And then when you look at someone like you or Gary Amlinger or Dirk and you think to yourself, oh, that's too fatiguing. For you, maybe, but for you guys, and also consider this, those tuning in, you guys are professional bodybuilders who are trying to be the best like literally. So there's going to be a sacrifice there. And sometimes it means sacrificing your body to a certain extent. Like that's a reality when you're talking about competing at the highest level. But you do it in the safest, most effective way you can, obviously possible. But you're putting your body on the line to a degree. And to what degree depends on to what type of sacrifice you're trying to make and how that makes you also feel psychologically like, hey, I'm getting after it. I want to be a world champion. There it is. I think I said it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was nodding because, like you said, everything you said there, I like it. There is, you can't just look at volume. You can't just look at intensity. You can't just look at exercise selection. You can't just look at frequency. You kind of have to look at them all. And then you have to take them into context of someone's lifestyle and then also their physique and then also like where their training history and their goals. Like there's too many variables. But I will say I just have a huge disdain for black and white statements of no one can do X. It's
Right.
like as soon as you say something like that, I switch off. I'm just like, I'm not interested in your opinion.
Right, right. Okay, so that answers it too, because obviously there's a lot of high level influencers. I think that's the right way to put it at this point, right? Where they are very much into the research, but at the same time, they're very dogmatic. They're very like nobody can recover from this amount, and if you do this, you're dumb, and if you do this, you're smart. And then you start thinking, maybe you just haven't seen enough people, or that's just the way you're wired. But I started thinking like you, I just kind of want to switch off. But at the same time, I'll take what's valuable there if you're going to put it out there. I know what to take, what's useful, and what not to take, but I know when to switch off, like what's not valuable. That's more so my take on it because I also don't want to be switching off to potential value, which I know you're probably thinking in the same way, but I don't know if you want to have anything to add there with that, by the way.
No, I just think that's a refreshing, good mindset to have, is
Yeah.
to just be open-minded. You can learn from everyone because everyone has their own unique experiences and things like this. But a red flag is when someone speaks in absolutes. It's never a good sign.
It's back to the training. Let's end it off with this, with your training and then maybe goals moving forward. But contest wise, I don't know if you've thought that far ahead, but with your training itself, what's that looking like now? So you mentioned, is it push pull legs? That's kind of the frequency that you found is going to help you with your goals?
Yeah, so I'm on that same split of I start the week with legs because for me, the quads, they're just the thing. If I can really I just want fucking huge quads, man. I just want huge
Yeah.
quads. I don't want anyone to look at me in a front relax and be like, yeah, your quads could come up. I want them to be like great quads. I just
Yeah.
want them like so bad. So I start with legs and both my leg sessions during the week are quads first. They're my kind of thing I really, really want to bring up. And so, yeah, I start with legs because of that, then push because chest is the next priority, then pull because back is something that I'm less concerned about. But what I will say is, as I said, I think because if we put it in these terms, people would probably know max recoverable volume from Mike
Yeah.
Israetel. It was like, say, down here at the end of prep, but as I'm getting more and more recovered, it's just creeping up. And so I'm finding the amount of volume I can do and recover from is getting greater. And I'm finding say for my quads, they're getting close to 6 to 8 sets per session, which is nothing crazy, but I could split that. If it was 18 sets, I could split that. Sorry, 16 sets. I could split that across 3 sessions, maybe. But
Right.
particularly for my back and for my chest, I'm finding they're getting to 10 to 12, potentially more sets. And it's making me consider going back to the upper lower because that worked so well for me previously. I'll probably, once I've fatigue requires me to back off and I take some days off, I'll change the split so that I can spread the volume over more days because I think there is a point of which you just get greatly diminishing to maybe quite unproductive sets once you get much past about 12, maybe. The
Right.
literature leans in that way too. And I think anecdotally, I kind of, once I get to about that number for a muscle group within a single session, it kind of feels like I could do more, but it doesn't feel like it's going to be wholly productive. But I'm recovering before my next session. So actually there's something I can do there and upping my frequency might be the way to go.
Right, right. Yeah, that is understandable for sure. And as far as the frequency aspect of things, when I think back to like some of the bodybuilders I've spoken to, some of the top pros I've spoken to, even the ones who are doing the I'm directly hitting X body part once every 7 days, let's just say, there is an overlapping component that like is often maybe missed. Like, and then you think, well, they actually are getting a frequency of 2 to 3 times on everything because this guy does deadlifts on back day. That's legs, like especially when you're pulling from the floor, right? And then it's like, okay, there's the 2 times for the lower body. I know it's not direct, but still, like it's direct for maybe the hamstrings and glutes. Like you, when you
Yeah.
start really start to pick it apart, you're like, maybe there is a real value in this, maybe hitting things more frequently when things are freshest, or where you can hit this when you're not as fatigued, kind of thing. So I can understand that. I've noticed that too, even in my own training. And then of course with the overlap, like I just mentioned, you're still going to get that frequency component. So I can see how these guys are still growing off of this 1 time per week
Yeah.
frequency when it's really not that, right?
Yeah. No, for sure. And the way I think about frequency, at least, is you do whatever frequency allows you to get the highest quality volume done through the week. That
Right.
should lead to the ultimate goal is to progress load and reps at your fastest rate, because
Yeah.
that is ultimately, as a natural, what we should probably focus on, because that's down to gaining more muscle. So
Yeah.
long as it's not like a new novel movement type of thing. Once you've been using it for a while, it's just like, hey, you got stronger or better because you'd been overloading and grown more muscle tissue for that. So they're kind
That's
of
well
what I
said.
focus on, at least.
Yeah, yeah, well said, well said. And the intensity of effort, is that still like we spoke last time, like 90, 95% of maybe a rep or two in reserve? Or are you doing the progression of, like I remember at one point there was, we spoke about this. I don't think you were doing it though, where you progress your intensity of effort, your proximity to failure throughout the week. Are
Sure.
you doing that? Are you still doing that?
Yeah, so when I come out of I think there's probably some sense in periodizing your reps in reserve or your proximity to failure. I think there probably is, just given that when you come after days off or a deload, you're just that much more sensitive to muscle damage and therefore soreness, and that could impede performance. So I think out of a recovery period or backing off, it makes sense to leave a little in reserve. Now, I don't leave as much as I have many years ago. At most, it'll be a 3 RER, say on like a big compound leg lift, but closer to 2 to 1 on upper body and isolation based lifts. And then once I've done that first week of just leaving a bit in reserve, I just look to progress. And I don't
Hmm.
focus on RER anymore. I know I'm within a threshold of growth and productive training. Yes, I'm not hyper focused on it. And at the
Okay.
moment, I've been essentially training at like a 0 to pass failure on some
Hmm.
things for multiple weeks, and it's been a good lesson because I'm like, hey, fatigue isn't that big a deal. I can still take it, even if that means repeating performance. That's okay. It's still productive training.
Interesting how
So
the body can
I've been going
adapt,
that way.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Like we think sometimes we limit ourselves, like not only from hey, I've hit my natural limit, but what about just your training in general? Like,
yeah,
oh, I can't
for
recover from
sure.
that. Oh, I too fatigued. That's too fatiguing. Man, have you tried? Like maybe just try it and see. But also, if you try it and see, make sure you're all in mentally. Because some people, if they've already checked out, they're not bought in, then it
Yeah.
won't work for them. For sure not, right? So,
Yeah, it's interesting because there is literature obviously showing that the closer you get to failure, the more fatigue there is. But that's short-term studies, and there hasn't been studies done on people who have been training consistently close to failure and if they
right.
adapt. And I think there probably is some adaptation. So I think there is some need to not need. I think in general it makes sense to periodize it to some extent, but I also don't think you have to like hyper focus on it once you just go with the level of adaptation that you're at. So you're unadapted to training very close to failure after a deloady period or fatigue recovery reducing fatigue reducing period. But then just gradually progress and you'll adapt. And then you can milk out this highly productive training where it's very close to failure and you're just trying to do as much as you can for as long as you can until
Yeah.
fatigue catches up to you, essentially.